The rain came soft at first, tapping like fingertips against the cracked windows of the old houses lining Ashford Lane. By the time the school bus hissed to a halt near the corner, it was falling steady, soaking through hoodies and bouncing off pavement slick with oil. Tyrell stepped off the bus, head down, a crumpled brown paper bag clutched tight in one hand. The driver didn't wait for a wave. No one ever did. Tyrell moved quickly, his sneakers slapping the sidewalk as he passed tidy lawns fenced in with white vinyl, the smell of fresh-cut grass mixing with ozone. But the further he walked, the more things changed. The green faded, the sidewalks buckled, and chain link replaced picket. At the end of the block, where the rain seemed to fall harder somehow, sat the sagging porch of Mr. Leonard's place, the gutters overflowing, the wood grey and splintered. The old man was already there in his rusted lawn chair, a knit cap pulled low over his ears, clouded eyes staring out at nothing. Tyrell climbed the steps and handed over the bag without a word. Mr. Leonard nodded once and fumbled with the knot at the top. They said nothing. They never really did. It had been like this for months now. Tyrrell showing up with lunch 3 times a week, dropping it off, sitting for a minute or two, then leaving. Nobody asked why. Nobody gave him grief for it, not even the kids who usually did. But today, something shifted. As Tyrell stood to leave, the old man's hand shot out fast, his grip surprisingly strong for someone so frail. He caught Tyrell by the wrist, thin fingers trembling slightly. "I won't be here forever," Mr. Leonard said, his voice raspy but clear. Tyrell froze. "One day, you'll need to know something. You've been the only one who ever came back." The boy looked at him, lips parting slightly, eyes flicking down the steps, then back to the man's pale, sightless gaze. The rain kept falling. Tyrell didn't pull away, not right away. Something about the way Mr. Leonard held, unlike he needed to say more. Like something had been waiting for the right moment, made the silence feel heavier than usual. Then, without another word, the old man let go. Tyrell turned and walked. Off the porch, slower this time. Not running, but not quite ready to stay. Behind him, the screen door creaked in the wind, and the rain swallowed the street hole. Why Tyrell came back, even he wasn't sure. Home wasn't much better than this. Porch, just louder, meaner. But here, for a few minutes, he could sit in silence, and no one asked him anything. Until now. Tyrell had learned early that silence was safer than shouting, and over time, he perfected the art of disappearing in plain sight. At school, he drifted through the halls like a shadow, clutching his worn sketchbook, eyes low, ears tuned to the whispers, but never reacting. The other kids didn't understand him, and they didn't try. He wasn't loud, didn't fight back, didn't chase girls or crack jokes in the cafeteria. He just watched faces, movements, how light hit a cheekbone or spilled through a cracked window. Sometimes he drew them, sometimes he didn't. The teachers noticed the quiet brilliance in his work, the sharpness in his essays, but none of it translated to the world he lived in. They said things like potential and concern, but Tyrell knew those words never made it home. His mother, Angela, came and went like smoke early mornings, late nights, a rotating cycle of nursing shifts and exhaustion. She loved him, maybe, in the way a person loves something they don't understand anymore. When she was home, she was tired, angry, brittle. The apartment was cramped and always too warm, filled with the hum of old appliances and the sharp clatter of a second-hand life. There were rules, but they shifted with her moods. Once, after a long silence at dinner, Tyrell asked about his father, why he left. If he ever tried to come back, and before the question even landed, she slapped him hard enough to make his ear ring. "He left because of you," she'd hissed, eyes wide, breath shaking. Tyrell didn't ask again. It was around that time, about a year ago, when Tyrell first met Mr. Leonard. He'd been walking home, his head down, when he spotted the old man on the sidewalk, crouched and fumbling, a bag of groceries spilled across the curb, eggs cracked, cans rolling, a bottle of milk leaking slowly into the gutter. People passed, looked, kept moving. Tyrell didn't. He knelt, without a word, helped gather everything, and when Mr. Leonard asked his name, he just said, "Ty." The man smiled like he already knew. Tyrell followed him the rest of the way home, carrying the broken bag in silence. Mr. Leonard had no one waiting for him. No nurse, no family, just a blind man in a house that looked like it hadn't been touched since the 80s. The porch sagged. The paint peeled in long, tired strips. Inside, it smelled like dust and old records. Tyrell didn't mean to come back, but he did first with an extra sandwich, then with leftover dinners, and soon it became routine. Monday, Wednesday, Friday, a quiet rhythm neither of them talked about. They rarely said much, but there was something in the quiet that felt more honest than anything else in Tyrell's life. The man never pitied him, never asked why his clothes didn't always fit or why his eyes looked so tired. He just accepted him, the way people sometimes accept a bird that keeps showing up at their window. Around the neighborhood, Mr. Leonard was a myth. People said he used to be rich-owned properties, businesses, maybe even a recording studio back in the day. Others swore he got caught in some kind of scandal, that his money vanished along with his reputation. Now he lived alone, surviving, off disability checks, his mailbox stuffed and his roof bowing. But inside that collapsing house, something felt steady. There were old jazz records always playing low, the smell of strong coffee, and walls lined with books and dusty photographs. Tyrell didn't ask about the past, and Leonard never offered until now. That single line, "You've been the only one who ever came back," lodged itself in Tyrell's chest like a shard of glass. He couldn't explain why it mattered so much. Maybe because, at school, he was invisible. At home, unwanted. But here, on that porch, rain or not, someone had noticed he kept showing up. Each day, the tension in Tyrell's world grew tighter. The weight of absence, his father's, his mother's, even his own, from the world around him pressed down harder. His drawings grew darker, sharper, lines etched with purpose he couldn't name. Mr. Leonard's presence, even in its silence, became an anchor. Something about the man's calm, his stubborn dignity, despite the ruin around him, made Tyrell feel like survival wasn't just possible, it could even have meaning. And yet, he sensed the old man didn't just need food. Something unspoken lay between them, a thread tied to a secret, something waiting to be handed down. Tyrell didn't know what it was, not yet. But for the first time in a long while, he wanted to stay long enough to find out. The rain was relentless that Thursday, a cold, driving downpour that turned gutters into rivers and soaked Tyrell to the bone as he pedaled faster than usual toward Mr. Leonard's house. He had the usual brown paper bag in his backpack, the smell of warm cornbread and beans seeping faintly through. But as he coasted to a stop at the curb, something was wrong. The porch was empty, the rusted lawn chair was gone, the screen door was shut tight, no soft jazz drifting through the cracked windows, no sign of life at all. Tyrell's heart kicked up, the rhythm inside him breaking pattern. He dropped his bike and ran up the porch steps, knocking once then again, louder. "Mr. Leonard," he called. Nothing. The house, always quiet, now felt dead. Through a narrow crack in the curtain, he could see into the dim living room, dusty, undisturbed, the old phonograph silent, the chair by the record shelf still turned the wrong way, like it hadn't been touched in days. Panic bloomed in his chest. He didn't know what to do. He turned to leave when a voice called out from across the street. Mrs. Haverly, a woman who rarely spoke to anyone, stood on her porch in a raincoat, arms folded. "They took him yesterday," she said, collapsed right there on the porch. Ambulance came just before noon, Hospital down off Fulton. Poor thing. Tyrell didn't wait. He grabbed his bike and pedaled hard, the rain hitting like nails against his hoodie, wheels sliding dangerously on wet pavement. His legs burned. He didn't care. When he reached the hospital, he locked his bike to a street sign and pushed through the sliding doors, dripping onto the polished tile. The nurses looked at him with confusion when he asked for Mr. Leonard. "Are you family?" one of them asked, already shaking her head. He didn't answer, just kept moving. Eventually, when no one was looking, he slipped down a side hall, ducked into a stairwell, and climbed, heart pounding with every step. On the third floor, he found room 317. He paused, then pushed the door open. The light inside was low. Machines beeped quietly. Mr. Leonard lay motionless, a plastic tube in his nose, an oxygen monitor clipped to his finger. His skin looked thinner, paler. The man who once seemed unshakable, now smaller than Tyrell had ever seen him. Tyrell stood, frozen, unsure whether to go closer, afraid he might already be too late. But then Leonard's fingers twitched. His eyes fluttered open, cloudy as always, but somehow still finding Tyrell in the room. "Come close," he rasped. Tyrell obeyed, stepping beside the bed, chest tight, throat burning. Leonard reached slowly under his pillow and pulled out a small, rusted key, placing it in Tyrell's hand with a trembling grip. "In my house," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the soft hum of the machines. "Upstairs, closet, behind the painting, you'll find what I couldn't fix." The words came in pieces, each one costing him breath. Tyrell leaned in, trying to understand, trying to ask what he meant, but Leonard's head slumped back, his breathing shallow and uneven. The monitor beeped in a strange, unsteady rhythm, and within moments, nurses burst in, calling names, moving fast. Tyrell was shoved back, unnoticed now in the chaos, the key still clutched tightly in his fist. He backed out of the room, his mind spinning. In the hallway, he stood soaking wet, his hoodie heavy with rain, his shoes squeaking on the linoleum. The key felt hot in his palm, impossibly real. His heart pounded as questions ricocheted in his skull. What was in the closet? Why him? What couldn't Leonard fix? He looked back at the room, but the door had already closed. Maybe Leonard was gone, maybe not. Either way, something had been handed to him, something quiet and dangerous, buried. In a house no one visited, behind a painting no one noticed. Tyrell didn't know what he was supposed to do, but he knew this much. He couldn't go home. Not yet. Not until he found out what the old man had left behind. Tyrell didn't go back to school the next day, or the day after that. The key burned in his pocket like a live coal, pressing against him as he wandered the streets, his mind a storm of confusion, fear, and a strange, aching hope he didn't know what to do with. He spent hours sitting by the overpass near the tracks, sketchbook unopened, hands jammed into his hoodie. He didn't eat much, didn't talk to anyone. The rain had stopped, but the world still felt wet, heavy and grey. At home, things weren't better. His mother barely noticed his absence until Thursday evening, when she caught him sneaking in through the kitchen. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, her eyes narrowed like knives. "Where have you been?" she snapped. Tyrell didn't answer. He just kept walking. But when he went to his room and dropped the hoodie on the floor, the key slipped out of the pocket, landing with a small metallic clink. His mother saw it before he did. She picked it up, turned it in her hand, and something in her face twisted hard and fast. "What is this?" she hissed. "You stealing now from that old man?" Her voice rose with every word. "You think this man is your father now?" The slap came without warning, harder than before, the sting hot across Tyrell's cheek. He didn't cry, didn't flinch, just stared at her, the betrayal sinking in like lead. She dropped the key on the floor like it burned her and stormed out of the room. Tyrell stood there, breathing hard, chest tight. He picked up the key and held it, cold and damp, in his shaking hand. That night, he didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the shadows dancing like ghosts across the cracked paint. He kept thinking of Mr. Leonard, the way his voice had trembled, the words he'd said. "You'll find what I couldn't fix." Something inside him shifted, broke open. He had to know. At midnight, Tyrell pulled on his hoodie, tucked the key into his sock, and climbed out his bedroom window. He took the back route, through alleys and side streets, staying in the shadows. The Leonard house stood dark and silent, sagging deeper into itself than ever before. The porch creaked under his weight. The lock turned with a click that sounded deafening in the quiet. Inside, the air was stale-smelling of dust, old wood, and loneliness. The jazz records were still stacked by the player, untouched. A mug with dried coffee sat on the table. Tyrell moved through the rooms like a ghost, every corner thick with memory. He found the stairs, creaking with each step, and followed the old man's instructions. Upstairs, closet, behind the painting hung in the hallway an oil portrait of a woman, elegant, soft-eyed, her features unfamiliar but regal, with a sadness behind the brushstrokes. Tyrell reached up, his fingers trembling, and eased it off the wall. The frame was heavier than he expected. Behind it, the wall bore a faint seam, a small latch tucked into the wood. He turned it. A door popped open with a dry groan. The closet. Inside was narrow, cramped, filled with the scent of paper and age. Tyrell crouched and pulled out the first thing he saw, a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings, brittle at the edges. Headlines jumped out. Local attorney disbarred amid scandal. Leonard B. Mallory accused of fraud. Clients left empty-handed. But as he read deeper, the story changed. Buried in the details were mentions of Leonard's son, Junior. Partner under investigation. Family ties complicate legal fallout. Next came a stack of letters, rubber-banded together, handwritten in a neat, precise scrawl. Tyrell read them slowly, his eyes widening with each page. The letters were, from Leonard, addressed to his son. Pleas for truth, for reconciliation. Some were desperate, others angry, all of them unanswered. A picture began to form one, not of a crooked old man, but of a father betrayed, cast out by the very person he tried to protect. Then Tyrell found the box, small, wooden, sealed with twine. He untied it and opened the lid. Inside were legal documents, old birth records, notarized statements. He sifted through them with growing dread, until he came to the one that stopped his breath. A birth certificate, his own, Tyrell James Merritt. Mother, Angela Merritt. Father, Devon Mallory. The name meant nothing at first, then everything. Mallory, Leonard's last name. Devon was the son, Leonard's son. His father. Tyrell staggered back, the certificate trembling in his hands. He looked again, checking the date, the signatures, the embossed seal. It was real. The realization hit like a wave, cold and devastating. Mr. Leonard wasn't just a lonely old man with a ruined house and a tragic past. He was Tyrell's grandfather. And all this time, neither of them had said it. Maybe Leonard didn't know. For sure, maybe he suspected. Maybe this key, this room was his way of giving Tyrell what no one else ever had. The truth. Everything inside Tyrell began to unravel and reweave at once. The silence, the porch, the strange way Leonard always seemed to be waiting for him, like expecting someone who never came. Tyrell thought of all the times he sat beside him, sharing nothing but space. And now he understood he hadn't been filling in for someone else. He was the someone, the missing piece, the family no one spoke of, the reason Leonard held on. Tyrell sat down in the hall, back against the wall, and stared at the open closet, his chest heaving, the birth certificate still clutched in his hand. He didn't know what came next, but he knew this. He couldn't go back to the boy he was before he turned that key. Tyrell didn't wait long. He burst into the apartment as dawn broke, the shadows of early morning still clinging to the walls. His mother was in the kitchen, bleary-eyed, pouring instant coffee into a chipped mug. She didn't look up until she heard the slam of the door. Tyrell stood there, soaked from sweat and emotion, the birth certificate gripped tight in his fist. "Why didn't you tell me?" he demanded, voice shaking. Angela blinked at him, confused at first, then she saw the paper. Her face paled. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. "From him," Tyrell shot back. "Leonard Mallory. He's my grandfather. And you," his voice cracked. "You let me think I had nobody." The silence between them cracked open, raw and vast. She moved slowly, setting the mug down with trembling hands, her tough exterior peeling back in jagged pieces. "I didn't want you to know," she said finally, barely above a whisper. "Your real father Devon, he lied to everyone, stole from clients, abandoned us before you were born. I was 20, alone, and his father, that man, he disappeared too. I thought if I cut them both out, you'd never have to carry it." Tyrell stared at her, stunned. "You don't get to decide that," he said. "You don't get to bury the truth just because it hurts." Her face twisted, the steel in her breaking. "I was trying to protect you," she shouted suddenly, the years of silence snapping all at once. "I didn't want you tied to that shame. I didn't want you walking around with his name dragging behind you like a chain." Her breath came fast. She looked like someone drowning. "And when I saw you with that old man, when you kept going back to him, I got scared. Scared he'd ruin you, too." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Tyrell looked at her not with anger now, but sorrow. She had been broken by the same man he never knew, and all her life since had been spent trying to outrun the shadow he left. "You can't keep hiding from this," Tyrell said quietly. "I'm not." Without another word, he left. The hospital was quiet when Tyrell returned. The nurse at the desk gave him a solemn look, like she recognized him, like she had expected this. Leonard was still in room 317, pale against the sheets, his chest rising and falling slowly beneath the hum of machines. Tyrell stepped in, his footsteps soft, deliberate. He pulled up a chair and sat beside him, holding the old man's frail hand. "You're my grandfather, aren't you?" he whispered. Leonard's eyes opened, fogged but focused. A single tear slipped down the side of his face. He nodded, barely. "I failed your father," he rasped, voice thin and full of ghosts. "He was too proud, too reckless. I thought I could fix it, clean it up, but I lost him. And then you kept showing up. I knew before I was sure. I just didn't want you to hate me too." His hand tightened weakly around Tyrell's. "You made me believe. Maybe I got one more chance." Tyrell couldn't speak. He just leaned closer, forehead touching the edge of the bed, tears finally slipping free. That night, Leonard passed with Tyrell's hand still wrapped in his, the beeping of the monitors flattening into silence, the room suddenly too still. Tyrell sat there long after they turned off the machines, unwilling to let go just yet. The funeral came 3 days later. No family arrived, no old friends or lawyers or neighbors, just Tyrell, dressed in his best school pants and a borrowed blazer, standing under a grey sky beside a plain pine casket. One nurse from the hospital came and stood quietly in the back. The preacher said the usual words, but it was Tyrell who knelt after they lowered the casket and placed the birth certificate gently on top. In his hand was a letter, the paper worn soft from rereading. It had been tucked deep in the legal box, addressed to Tyrell James Mallory. The handwriting was shaky, but clear. "They'll remember what they want to remember. Let them. Say what they will. But you rewrite the name. Make it mean something again." As the dirt fell over the casket, Tyrell stood straighter than he ever had before. He wasn't just a quiet boy from the broken apartment anymore. He was something else now. He was part of a story that hadn't ended the way it was supposed to, but maybe, just maybe, he was the one who could finish it right. The paperwork was dense, full of language Tyrell barely understood, but he brought it to someone who did. Elston, his literature teacher, the only adult at school who seemed to look past the silence and see the weight he carried. When he showed her the deed, the birth certificate, and Leonard's letter, she didn't ask how he got them. She just nodded, took a deep breath, and said, "Let's figure this out." Together, they began the process of filing for ownership. Of the house, it was old, crumbling in places, and barely met the standards for occupancy, but it was his. Tyrell's name, for the first time, was tied to something real. He spent weekends scrubbing mold from corners, patching cracks with borrowed tools, and hauling old furniture to the curb. Every room he touched felt like a step forward. A layer of dust peeled off his past. The silence in the house was different, now less hollow, more hopeful. At school, people still whispered, but Tyrell didn't shrink anymore. He started showing up to class earlier, lifting his head when teachers called on him. In civics, he debated for the first time quietly, but confidently, about justice and restitution. Ms. Alston noticed. After class one day, she slipped him a pamphlet for a scholarship aimed at students interested in studying law. "You've already lived through more than most lawyers ever face," she said. "Maybe it's time to turn that into something." Tyrell took it home, read it 3 times, and tucked it beside the letter Leonard left him. Angela noticed the changes to. At first, she hovered at a distance, watching him come and go, hearing the sounds of him working late at the Leonard house. She asked no questions, but one Saturday afternoon, she showed up at the porch with cleaning gloves and a bucket. She didn't say much, just started wiping down the banister while Tyrell cleared cobwebs from the windows. They worked in quiet rhythm, not unlike the way Tyrell and Leonard had before. As the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows over the street, they sat together on the front steps, the same porch where Tyrell once passed over brown paper bags without a word. Angela looked out over the street, her face softer than it had been in years. "He wasn't a monster," she said, not looking at Tyrell. "Just broken, like all of us." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of what wasn't said an apology, a reckoning, a mother finally seeing her son not as something to be protected from the past, but as someone strong enough to carry it inside. Tyrell had cleared the upstairs hallway and painted the walls a fresh, warm white. The portrait of the woman, the same one that had once hidden a closet full of truth, he had cleaned, reframed and hung with care. She watched over the house now, elegant and sad, but no longer forgotten. Tyrell would sometimes stop and look at her on his way to his room, wondering who she'd been to Leonard's wife's sister, memory. But mostly, he looked at her as a symbol of what could be remembered with grace. The house still creaked, the roof still needed fixing, but each repaired floorboard, each scrubbed tile, was a part of Tyrell claiming something more than just a name. He was reclaiming a story, stitching himself back into a legacy that had nearly been erased. And this time, he wasn't running from it, he was building it, one room at a time. 1 year later, Tyrell stood behind a podium in a second-hand suit that fit just well enough, his tie slightly crooked but his voice steady. The community center auditorium was packed, teachers, neighbors, city officials, but Tyrell barely noticed. He looked out over the crowd, cleared his throat, and began. "He used to sit on a porch that everyone passed by, but I stopped. Didn't know I was walking into my own history. Sometimes we find family where we least expect it. Sometimes the key isn't just to adore, it's to the truth." His words lingered in the hush that followed, the kind of silence, not from absence, but from meaning. As he stepped off the stage, polite applause swelling behind him, his eyes found Angela in the second row. She stood, clapping softly, her eyes glassy with tears not of pain this time, but of something gentler, fuller, pride, maybe, or peace. Tyrell didn't linger for congratulations. He walked home through the same streets he once used to avoid, past the bus stop, the cracked sidewalks, the broken fences. The house was waiting, its porch freshly painted, windows clean, the woman's portrait still hung upstairs, still watching. Tyrell climbed the steps and placed a small paper bag on the bench wrapped tight, still warm, just like always. He sat for a moment beside it, looking out at the quiet street, remembering the man who once waited here every week without fail. "Thank you," he whispered not loud, not for anyone to hear but himself. Then he stood, stepped back inside the house that was his now, and closed the door gently behind him. Fade out.